If you guys enjoy what I do, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel and it's free and easy to do. Before we get started with today's video, I have an announcement to make. After years of telling other people's stories, I finally released one of my own. My novel Eternal Reign is available now in both ebook and paperback format for those of you who are like me and prefer to collect physical media. You can grab a copy right now on Amazon through the link in the description of this video. And now back to our regularly scheduled program. The Warrior of Light can't go anywhere without someone asking him for something, and when he heads back to Mordona, a Roganan had been looking for you in particular. A friend of his had sent him a letter saying that he needed your help with an important, very confidential task, which means not only can't the man tell you what you're needed for, he can't even tell you who needs you. But he thinks you'll recognize him once you see him. If you're going to help, which we know that you are, he wants you to head to Limsa Lominsa to meet with Denston. The guy works for his friend, so he can tell you what to do next. I'm just waiting for the day when the Warrior of Light walks off when someone tries to send him on a scavenger hunt, but today's not that day, so it's off to Limsa we go. Apparently this mission really is serious, because as soon as you get there, Denston doesn't waste any time telling you what needs to be done. It involves Mistbeard, a very well-known pirate. Mistbeard was known by all, feared by most, and loved by some until he just vanished one day. He didn't exactly vanish, but instead took off his mask and joined Merlwyb when she set out to hunt down her father who'd been tempered by Leviathan. But that's not what Denston's talking about today. Rumors have spread that Mistbeard left behind some treasure. That's where you come in, and Einzar, aka Mistbeard, shows up to clue you in. But first he wants you to understand that he's not asking for your help on behalf of the Navy, since this is more of a personal matter. For a while, people had lost interest in Mistbeard's treasure, since no one had managed to learn anything about its location, but recently that's changed. In the south, there are some small islands where very few ships go because the mist in the area is so thick that you can hardly see anything. Worse, all of the ships that have sailed into that mist never came out. A few survivors from some of those voyages washed up on the shore, and when they came to, they talked about an island hidden in the mist that appeared so fast that they crashed into it, destroying their ships. So the place got named Hullbreaker Isle, which is actually a pretty cool name. After the calamity, the mist would disappear sometimes, and one day while the mist was gone, a merchant accidentally went through the area, and he saw that the Haar, Mistbeard's flagship, was one of the ships that had crashed in the Hullbreaker Isle. The merchant wanted to explore the ship, but he made the wise decision to leave before the mist came back, trapping him there. When he got back to Limsa, he ordered his crew not to say anything. But who really keeps secrets these days? Now treasure hunters are racing to the Isle to find the treasure. Einzar wants you to get there first, find Mistbeard's ship, and get a golden chest that has Mistbeard's crest on it. He would do the job himself, but with him being the Storm Marshal, he'd draw a lot of attention, which is why he wants you to go. As payment, as long as you bring back what he asked for, anything else you find is yours, which is probably the only payment anyone's offered the Warrior of Light that actually matches the job he was hired for. And that's more than enough reason to accept the mission, although Denston's setting you up with a ride to the island, but telling you that you have to find your own way back should have made you nervous. But I don't think the Warrior of Light is smart enough to be nervous, because he goes to the island without even hesitating. Animals of all kinds wander around the isle, not to mention a few Voidsent who possess treasure chests and turn them into mimics. And as I'm sure you already know, they're all hostile toward you. But after traveling and fighting your way past them all, you finally make it to Mistbeard's ship, which is of course guarded by a kraken. It tries to grab you and eat you, but after you slap its tentacles enough, it decides you're not worth the trouble and it leaves, allowing you to claim Mistbeard's treasure. Einzar's happy to see that you pulled it off, and since you found it, he shows you what's in the chest. Turns out it held Mistbeard's mask, which is more important than you might think. Apparently Mistbeard has been a lot of different people throughout history. The title passed on to men who were deemed worthy, along with the mask. So if someone had gotten their hands on the mask, they could have gathered a following that could have caused the stability of Limsa to come to an end. And since Einzar decided to drop the mantle of Mistbeard for the sake of the Admiral's vision of a united Limsa, he couldn't let that happen, and with your help, Einzar's made sure that Mistbeard's drawn his last breath. But because pirates don't waste anything, Einzar couldn't just let the Haar sit there and get picked apart by scavengers, so he petitioned the Admiral to set up a camp on the island that can be used to train soldiers, since the island is far enough away and dangerous enough to give a real taste of combat to the soldiers. The main reason he wants to put the soldiers into some real combat situations is because he thinks the men are getting soft, and he wouldn't mind if you joined in for a little training exercise. He really wants you to run the gauntlet that they set up on the island to see what the Maelstrom's elite soldiers can improve on. They make it a point to tell you not to be too rough. They don't want you to break any bones, but if you knock a few teeth out, that'll teach them to keep their guard up and bob and weave a little faster. The pirates give the Warrior of Light some of the best jobs. Denston wishes he could join in, but unfortunately he's on mist watch because if no one pays attention, they won't be able to track when the mist will cover Hullbreaker Isle again, and that would be bad. But he's still glad that a legendary hero like you is willing to help them out. So once again you head back to Hullbreaker Isle, but the place has changed a lot since that last visit. The formerly wild animals have been put in the pens and used as warm-ups for the soldiers, which is probably not something that OSHA would approve of, but what did you expect from a pirate training course? Hearing that the Warrior of Light was going to be there caused some of the larger pirate crews like the Sirens and the Krakens to show up and test themselves against you. That's the problem with being the best. Everybody wants a piece of you. That also means you never get the chance to get rusty either, and the Warrior of Light cuts his way through them all. Even Storm Commander Riki finally gets to take a shot at you, something that she's wanted to do for a long time. Seeing everybody fighting gets Anyder riled up, and he decides to go a few rounds with you too. Merlewip taunts him when he starts to lose, so he decides to not hold back anymore and slaps on the mask of Mistbeard that he said he would get rid of, and goes all out against you. He still loses because of course he does, but that doesn't mean he didn't enjoy it. When you get back to Limsa, Denston wants to hear all about it, and Anyder is more than happy to tell the story of how you wrecked everybody, and even caused the Sirens and the Krakens to show up. Technically, they are a part of Limsa's military after the Galadian Accord, but they normally refuse to train with the Maelstrom. But who could resist training with you? Only idiots turn down the opportunity to work with professionals. When Denston notices how the commander is limping, he realizes that even he had gotten involved, something that Denston would have abandoned his own post to see. Old or not, watching the chief fight would have been the highlight of his day, and he hopes that you'll come train with them again someday so he'll finally get to see it. Connie Center and her siblings work together to listen to the elements and deal with any problems that show up in the land, and recently her brother has heard some bad news, which is what Smileton, the conjurer trainer, wanted to talk to you about. Something's been stirring in the lost city of Amdapor out in the South Shroud. During the 5th Astral Era, the city was a thriving place of magic, but it was sealed during the time of the War of the Magi. Unfortunately, because of the most recent calamity, the seal on the city was weakened, which caused the forest around the place to start to die. That's a very serious thing to the elementals and the Pajal, so Smileton wants you to figure out why it's happening. Normally the twin adders would have dealt with the problem, but they're stretched very thin, so hiring an accomplished adventurer is the best way for them to move forward. Since you agree to help, the Warrior of Light heads to meet Raya Osena at Camp Tranquil so she can explain what her brothers discovered. Raya already knows why you're there, but she wishes Isumi had explained more to you so she wouldn't have to do it, but it is what it is. Other than Amdapor Keep, the lost city of Amdapor is all that's left of the Amdapori. There are no records on how the city got wiped out, but the elementals say it was done in by what they call an unclean presence. Elementals are always very vague, but Raya thinks that whatever her brother sensed is the very thing that destroyed the city. Arun Senna, her brother, finally shows up to fill in the rest while his sister complains about him taking so long. He probably had a hard time finding you because he keeps his hair over his eyes for some reason. Don't understand how that's not annoying. In any case, the thing he senses in Amdapor is getting stronger every day and is freaking the elementals out. Whatever's waking up in the city has them more afraid than he's ever seen them, and he wants you to go into the city to see what it is and destroy it if you can. There's a wood whaler named Alphine guarding the place, so if you let him know why you're there, he should let you in. They send word ahead of you, and from what Alphine senses coming from the city, he admits that you're more brave than he is for going in there at all. The city's ether has been out of balance since the calamity, and now the place is a festering pool of rot and decay, and the animals have been driven insane by the changes in the environment. It's definitely not a place you'd put all that high on your list of vacation sites, especially if you have allergies or any self-preservation skills. As you head deeper into the city past the mutated insects, you reach a place where it seems like multiple Voidsent are bound, and at the very heart of the prison, you come across Diabolos, who at first thinks you're one of the white mages of Amdapor who finally thinks that they can destroy him. The Warrior of Light manages to win, but Diabolos claims that sleeping for so long has weakened him, so he turns into a cloud of bats and flies away. That means you're definitely gonna run into him again. That happens in the Shadows of Ma'ak series, which I'll link at the end of this video so you can see just what Diabolos does now that he's free from Amdapor. But that's a problem for later. Unfortunately, the issues with the Lost City did not end with Diabolos. After you drove the Voidsent off, Smileton and the other Pajal went into the ruins with the Elementals. The Elementals freaked out again, saying that something with incredible power was still deep within the city. And now the Elementals won't go back into the area until the threat's been dealt with, so once again you head back to Camp Tranquil to talk with Raya. She is of course happy to see you again. Since you were able to deal with the first threat in Amdapor, she figures that you can handle this one too. She would have told you about it on your first trip, but she couldn't sense it beneath the darkness that Diabolos was radiating. She wants you to do whatever it takes to fix the place, while the rest of them try to calm the Elementals, so it's back into the city you go. The city is a little less tainted without Diabolos' influence, so you're free to search other areas, although the monsters there are still very much hostile. After dealing with some savage insects and making your way deeper into the city, you come across the reanimated corpses of Ma'aki and Amdapori mages who died during one of the battles of the War of the Magi. Then you come across some of the city's defenses that should seem extremely familiar. They are statues that look very much like Sin Eaters that you encountered in Shadowbringers. Now there are a few possible reasons why, but since none of them are confirmed as far as I know, I have to do a little speculating. So during the War of the Magi, when Ma'aki and Amdapor were trying to destroy each other, the Ma'aki mage Shatoto figured out how to summon Voidsent, which gave them an edge. I think as a means of countering the dark ether fueled Voidsent, the Amdapori tried to make light ether creatures of their own. This probably led to the birth of the very first Sin Eater, but due to the way the ether works on the source, the creatures would have either taken way too much ether to make, or would have been too weak to challenge the Voidsent. So instead of trying to make more of the creatures, they made stone golems in the shape of the Sin Eaters and powered them up with magic, and used them to fight the Voidsent. That's all just a theory, but it's one that makes a little bit of sense since the Amdapori wouldn't have known that the Voidsent came from another dimension, and they wouldn't have been able to summon actual Sin Eaters since the creatures of the first wouldn't have existed at the time of the war. Regardless, the Warrior of Light fights his way through Amdapor and takes down the golems, which turn out to be what the Elementals had been spooked by. The defenses of Amdapor had likely both been awakened and damaged by the calamity that had weakened the seal on the city, and since they were built to repel external magic from Ma'ak, they probably thought the Elementals were enemies, which is what made the Elementals flee for their lives. In any case, the mission is accomplished, the day is saved, and all that's left is to deal with Diabolos and whatever he's planning. If there's one thing people know about adventurers, is that they're always looking for something exciting and a little bit dangerous to do. And exploring ancient ruins is always exciting, which is why Nedrick Ironheart tells the Warrior of Light about Amdapor Keep. It's a ruined fortress out in South Shroud that was built sometime back in the 5th Astral Era, which means it could be a very interesting place to explore, so you head to the South Shroud to check it out. The entrance is guarded by a woodweller named Maxine, and since Nedrick sent you, she thinks it'll be a good idea to let you know exactly what you'll be facing if you head into the keep. The place was built by the Amdapori, ancient masters of all things arcane, and they built a lot of incredible structures like the keep all around the world. Unfortunately, the keep's been taken over by a cult called the Lambs of Dalamud, who have been summoning Voidsent, which is why the Woodwellers are more than happy to let adventurers run around and thin out the cultist numbers. So not only does the Warrior of Light get to explore some ruins, he gets to deal with some weirdos and some Voidsent, which makes for a fine way to spend a bit of time. However, to say that the cult had summoned a few Voidsent would be a serious understatement. There are a lot of them, and the cult is more of a small army than a handful of crazies, which gives you quite a few relatively dangerous Voidsent to deal with. But fortunately for you and the people of the Shroud, it wasn't anything that you couldn't handle. And not only do you deal with the Voidsent, the Warrior of Light all but wipes the cult out in its entirety. With the job done, the Warrior of Light heads back to Mordona, only to run into Lorianne, who's already heard word of someone clearing the cult out of Amdapor Keep. She of course didn't know that it was you, but that's a good thing because a hero called Adestan has sensed something evil coming from the keep, and he wanted to talk to someone who had already ventured into the place. So you head to Camp Tranquil to see what's happened. When you tell him who you are, Adestan immediately tells you everything. Arun Senna had sent him to investigate the keep, and what he found is bad, which is why he needed you. Even though the Lambs of Dalamud have been wiped out and their Voidsent summoning stopped, the dark presence that's coming from the keep seems to get stronger every day. Woodwellers went into the place to find out why, and it turns out that someone finished the cultists' ritual and summoned a very powerful Voidsent to lead a small army of the creatures. Adaston wants you to deal with it before it wreaks havoc on the countryside. Maxine's surprised to see that you ended up being the one to come and help yet again, but she warns you that your trip won't be the same as it was the last time. This new Voidsent has corrupted the animals, turning them into savage beasts and making the place even more dangerous than it was before. She hopes that dealing with the Voidsent leader will solve this problem, so you head inside to do just that. The Voidsent hasn't just corrupted the animals, even the plants have grown into monstrous man-eating things, and that makes your second trip into Amdapor Keep all the more dangerous. And there are tons of lesser Voidsent to contend with that don't make the situation much better. But you fight your way through them all and come face to face with Ferdiad, who is a step above any of the other creatures that you face in the keep. However, that doesn't stop you from overpowering him too. Although while it looks like you finished him off for good, when the Warrior of Light leaves the keep, Ferdiad's laughter follows him. Back at Camp Tranquil, Adaston is happy that you've dealt with the problem, but he's still trying to figure out who summoned the Voidsent in the first place, since the cult was dead and gone. Other than the animals and the Voidsent, there wasn't a single human alive in the keep, but the corpses of the cult members were still where you had left them after your first visit, which makes Adaston believe that the lifeblood of the cultists mixing with the runes of summoning that they had drawn had finished their spells, meaning it was only right that you dealt with the Voidsent, since you had inadvertently helped summon them in the first place. Near the Waking Sands, the Warrior of Light runs into an adventurer named Aline, who's been having a rough time since her trip into the Wanderer's Palace nearly killed her. But apparently she doesn't regret the experience. After the most recent calamity, half of the water in Camp Bronze Lake vanished, revealing an ancient temple, and she went there with her boyfriend. The place was pristine, practically undamaged by all of the water, and they were enjoying seeing the sights there, so she figures an adventurer like you would like the place too. If you want to go and check it out for yourself, her friend Abazi Chirazi in Camp Bronze Lake will give you a ride. Naturally, you wouldn't pass up an opportunity to see an ancient temple, so you head out to meet the guy. Turns out Aline hadn't told you the whole story. She sent a lot of adventurers to the Wanderer's Palace, hoping that one of them will rescue her boyfriend. Aline had gone in with 6 others, and as soon as they set foot in the place, a tonberry attacked them. It was dark and the floor was wet, making it really hard to fight back. Only Abazi and Aline made it out alive. Everyone else died. Aline still has hope, but Abazi saw what the tonberry did to his friends. The same will happen to you if you try to wander around in the place, but since you want to go, he takes you. The place is as beautiful as Aline said it was, and filled with tonberry. Other adventurers who the woman tricked into braving the depths of the place are running for their lives from the little, and not so little, green knife-wielding psychos. The Wanderer's Palace was originally a temple dedicated to the Nemean patron god Oshan, who ruled over the mountains. Now the thing about the tonberry is they are actually the cursed people of Nim. The Ma'aki, during the War of the Magi, had unleashed the Voidsent Batoso on the Nemean people, and it gave them a disease that made their noses and ears melt away, their bodies turned green, and their limbs shriveled up. To try and stop the plague from spreading, everyone infected was locked away in the Wanderer's Palace. Because they didn't know about the unseen Voidsent, the Nemean mages used magic to bury the place underwater, and it stayed that way until recently. The Warrior of Light, being who he is, fights his way to the bottom of the place and kills the Tonberry King. Despite that, there is no sign of Aline's boyfriend, meaning Abazi was right about the fate of his friends. A little while later in Mordona, word of you killing the Tonberry King has spread, and there's a guy looking for you who wants to offer you a job. He and his partner are out at Camp Bronze Lake, so once again you head back there. They turn out to be 2 of the adventurers that you ran past in the Wanderer's Palace, who were stabbed nearly to death by the Tonberry. And what they want you to do is go back into the palace, but it's for a reason that you probably wouldn't believe. After they had got stabbed, they thought they were done for, but all of a sudden the Tonberry started patching them up. Apparently the only reason they were attacking people was because of a curse that you lifted by killing the Tonberry King. Now this isn't the curse that turned them into the creatures in the first place, but something different altogether, which probably means they should stop dealing with magic because they really don't have good luck with it. Once the curse was lifted, staying in the palace was outright pleasant, but it didn't last. A group of Mamoja called the Silver Scales came into the palace and took over. The Tonberries who weren't killed in the attack were locked deep in the ruins, and the 2 treasure hunters want you to free them. If they were stronger, they'd do it themselves, but since they can't, they want you to do it. So you get a Bazi to shuttle you to the palace again so you can act as the savior of the tonberries. The Silver Scales seem to have a lot of members, and they all seem to take pride in picking on the much smaller tonberries, so the Warrior of Light cuts a path through them, fighting his way to their two-headed leader. You beat him, but before you get the chance to finish him off, a pack of tonberries rush in and put their knives to use. Now that the palace is back under tonberry control, the two adventurers decide to head back into the place, because now that it's safe, it's not such a bad place to live. In the city of Kugane, a member of the East Aldenar Trading Company comes running up to you screaming about how he needs help from a capable adventurer, and of course you fit that description. There's some trouble in Kugane Castle that the government is trying to keep secret, so naturally this Lalafell tells you all about it. The place has been taken over by bandits, and they've taken hostages, some very high-profile hostages. They want the country's borders to be closed off because they feel that Kugane made a mistake by working with other nations, and they don't want foreigners to set foot on their lands anymore. Normally the Second Segumi would have dealt with the problem, but they don't want to put the hostages at risk, and for them to make their move they would need government approval, which there's no telling how long that would take to get. So they called on the East Aldenar Trading Company to see if there was some other way to get the hostages out of the castle. The only reason they did that was because one of the hostages is from Ulda, so they really don't want anything to happen to her because they would end up getting attacked by an army of Lalafell, and nobody wants that. So the Second Segumi wants the trading company to put together a small team to infiltrate the castle, and this Lalafell wants you to be a part of that team. We all know that the Warrior of Light is going to do it, so he heads off to the aqueducts to where a guard is waiting by a secret passage into the castle to tell you what to do next. The group of criminals who took over the castle are led by a merchant named Kageyama, and they think the real reason he wants to close the borders is to avoid having to compete with foreign businesses. His group's not really a threat that the Second Segumi think they couldn't handle. The problem is he's hired a bodyguard who is a well-known swordsman from the Hingan underworld. He's extremely expensive, and the more money he's paid, the harder he fights, and Kageyama has a lot of money. Your mission is to charge in and cause a distraction and deal with the merchant and his bodyguard while the Second Segumi sneak in and free the hostages. The Warrior of Light and his team break into the castle and prove pretty quickly that what the Second Segumi member said was accurate. The merchant's bandits are hardly a threat worth mentioning. Your team cuts your way through them without breaking a sweat, leaving only one opponent left, Yojimbo. He more than lives up to his reputation as both a master swordsman and a greedy capitalist, demanding money before he'll unleash his special techniques. A wise and very crazy clown once said, "If you're good at something, never do it for free," and Yojimbo takes that to heart. Whether or not the samurai could have actually beaten you all or not is something that we'll have to find out in the future, because Kageyama runs out of money, so Yojimbo just leaves, leaving Kageyama at your mercy. The man who hired you has already heard about what happened by the time you make it back. Kageyama was arrested, however they couldn't find Yojimbo, but the hostages were saved, and Lady Leliju shows up to thank you both personally. Considering the fact that she was Lolorito's niece, it's a very good thing you managed to save her before anything bad could happen to her, because I'd be willing to bet that Lolorito is likely the most dangerous and powerful Lalafell in the world, and the destruction he would have rained down on Kugane if his niece had been hurt would have been legendary. Of course, it still might happen because the girl decided to travel the world and write stories about what she does, so she'll definitely end up in harm's way again, and whoever hurts her will have to face the wrath of Lolorito. Drovania is one of those places that the Warrior of Light visits pretty often, and on one of his trips, he runs into a treasure hunter who just finished running for her life. She was exploring a place with some friends when they got chased by some seedkin and nearly died. Even though the place she was in was pretty unsafe, she still wants the treasure, and since you look kind of tough, she asks you to clear a path for a crew. They'll pay you, which is pretty much all you need to hear to take any job, so the Warrior of Light heads to meet the woman's friend named Sonny outside of St. Mocianne's Arboretum, while she goes back to Idleshire to get a few more people to join in the exploration once the Warrior of Light does his thing. Sonny's not all that hard to spot since he has a giant blonde afro, and when he finds out you're there to deal with the living plants that are running around in the Arboretum, he's happy because his people had no shot of clearing the place out. In the time before the Sharlians abandoned the area, they used the place to study plant life from all around the world. They also used to keep the stuff well contained. With no one there to monitor the stuff, the plants have pretty much taken over everything, and quite a few of them are man-eaters. Under most circumstances, Sonny's people would have just left the place alone. But they found some paperwork that showed that there's something in the Arboretum that they could really use to help the people of Idleshire. He doesn't care about most of the other relics lying around in the place, so they're yours if you want them. That's not a bad deal, so the Warrior of Light heads into the Arboretum to do a little bit of not so harmless lawn mowing. Saying the place is overgrown is not even just an understatement, it's an outright lie. The original structure is pretty much gone, replaced by ponds with lily pads the size of elephants and a beehive the size of a hotel. It's cartoonishly big, and the only type of plant life that's in the place wants to eat you. But the Warrior of Light's not really new to any of this, so he cuts his way through it all, clearing a path for the treasure hunters. Since you cleared the way, Sawny's people find what they're looking for, and he's eager to get back to tell the worst named Roganin in the game, Midnight Dew, what he found. Sawny figures that she'd want to thank you for your help, so you go with him to talk to the woman. The woman's happy that it worked out, because what they were trying to get were special seeds made by the Sharlians that will help the people of Idleshire get new things to trade. Right now, the small settlement makes its money by collecting junk from the ruins around the area, then selling it for a little bit of profit. But eventually they'll run out of stuff, so if the community wants to keep growing and prospering, then they need new ways to get resources. Those seeds were phase 1 of that plan, and crops that can grow in any climate are definitely a valuable resource. It won't happen overnight, but since you helped out, Midnight Dew plans on keeping you posted on how it turns out. But since the Warrior of Light constantly goes to Idleshire anyway, he'll likely see the changes happen firsthand. Ironically enough, the next time he sees Sawny isn't in Idleshire at all. The man catches up to him at Rogger's Reach because they've run into some more trouble in the Arboretum, and he's hoping that you have a bit of time to swing by and help out. When you get there, Midnight Dew shows up to explain the situation, and she has a very hyperactive, weird-looking seedkin with her. The thing had come hopping out of the Arboretum with way more energy than it should have had, and they think it has something to do with the mud that it's covered in. They figure that if the mud could energize that one seedkin like that, it could work wonders on their new gardens that they planted. They would have gone and got it themselves, but the same mud that made the relatively harmless plant creatures supercharged works the same way on the stuff with teeth, meaning if they would have sent their plant expert in there alone, she would have been used for fertilizer. So the only way for them to actually go in and get what they need is if you're willing to do your whole stabby thing again. The Warrior of Light goes in to handle things and realizes really fast that the mud-coated critters got stronger by a whole 10 levels, which also made them bigger and more creative in their attempts to consume you. One of these mud-coated monsters was clogging up the plumbing, which kept the water from flowing, so once it's dealt with, the water can flow again, which will help with the cleanliness problem in the place. Midnight Dew and the botanist Edgith had followed your trail, and while you cleared a path, they found the papers explaining that the weird mud was actually a mixture used to rapidly grow the materials the Sharlians needed to make their formula to turn plants into fertilizer instantly. A side effect was that the mud made actual seedkin aggressive. The good news is all it takes to cure them of that aggression is a little bit of water. In other words, the entire mission could have been handled with a hose pipe and a bucket. But time wasting aside, the Warrior of Light did help them get what they needed to speed up the process of growing their plants, which means good thing for the people of the area, unless of course Square Enix forgets about growing Idleshire and it stays the same way from now until forever. Up in Ishgard, a member of the Ironworks has a message for you from Wedge. The Lalafell wants you to meet him out in Azizla at the Aetherochemical Research Facility to help him out with the top secret project. So of course you fly out there to meet him in what has to be one of my favorite areas in the game. You find Wedge standing around with the Allagan node Gilly that had proved to be useful on one of your earlier trips to the area. Wedge missed the node's company, so he snuck out of the Ironworks headquarters while Sid wasn't paying attention, but when he found the node, it had run out of power. Apparently Allagan batteries only last a few thousand years, which is totally unacceptable when we have cell phones that might last a few hours in our current time. They really need to step up their tech game. Wedge of course feels bad that the node isn't operational, so of course he wants to do something about it, and he volunteers you to help him because why not? He had tried to fix the node himself, but he couldn't, so he's gonna do the next best thing. Transfer Gilly into a new body altogether. And there's a place not far away that should have exactly what you need, the Fractal Continuum. It was a warship that the Allagans had turned into a museum for their technology. Wedge sends you there alone because why would he put himself in danger when he could just send you? The place is on lockdown for any visitor without a level 3 clearance, so the moment you pop in, the security systems jump to life and try to murder you. I've been to quite a few museums in my life, and I've never seen anything close to this level of security. At best, our museums may have a few security cameras and an in-shape security guard or two. The Fractal Continuum has a bit more efficient guards, like the clockwork soldiers that were made so the citizens would never have to be in danger during war again. Of course, dying in war wasn't the only thing the Allagan people had to worry about, since they had beasts like the Chimera running around who were so dangerous that special machines had to be made to stop them. Having dealt with all these different types of Allagan defenses before, the Warrior of Light doesn't have any problem cutting a path through the robots and beasts to find Gilly a new body. With the new, much more pocket-sized node in tow, you head back to Wedge, and because he's a tech genius, he manages to transfer Gilly's mind into the new body. And everything works fine, so Wedge decides to send her with you so she can see the world while he gets back to the ironworks before Sid kills him. Honestly, Sid probably didn't even notice that he was gone. The one he should be worried about is Jesse. Either way, that part of your job is over, but there's always more to do when you're the Warrior of Light. Not long after your little trip with Wedge, Philiot, another member of the Ironworks, wants you to head back to the Fractal Continuum with him. The Ironworks detected a strange signal coming from the inside, which, with the luck you have, means some Allagan super weapon woke up after your last trip and is about to start murdering people. But there's no way to know if no one goes to check it out, and they obviously want that someone to be you, so it's back to Oz's Lie you go. Unfortunately, the teleporter you used to go into the museum the last time is locked because someone's already triggered the alarm, and the security locks the place down until the threat is gone. That means the only way into the place would be to fly the Enterprise to it directly, something that Philiot, being new and all, isn't all that comfortable doing. He's just a regular guy from the slums of Ishgard, so something this big is beyond him, but he thinks he can handle it with you there. Or he could just use his link pearl and call, all of the other more experienced Ironworks members. Instead, you hop into the ship and head back to the Fractal Continuum. Of course, Philiot decides that it'll be safer if he waits by the ship while you work, since it's clear that whatever triggered the alarm caused a lot of the creatures to break free of their containment units. The security is a lot tougher this time, including an Ultima weapon prototype called the Ultima Warrior that can use the techniques of different icons like the Warring Triad, which makes it extremely dangerous, and it's also the thing that Sid uses to make the G-Warrior later on. But that's a story for another day that I've already covered on this channel. But that's not even the worst thing in this place. The Allagans have a modified behemoth as a guard dog, which of course you deal with because you're the Warrior of Light. Philiot's surprised you both managed to live, but that's because he doesn't understand how you operate. But at least you learned that the Allagan weapons that were released when the security system kicked on were what the Ironworks sensors had picked up, and the thing that had triggered the alarms was an XIV that had gone into the place. However, when Philiot tried to talk to him, he hadn't been much for conversation. It's strange that the XIV even made it to Oz's Lie, because their balloons aren't really equipped to fly that high, which makes him wonder if the rumors are true about an XIV group called the XIV making a special airship. He wants to go talk to them to make sure they don't decide to take their new ship out to Oz's Lie again and accidentally wake up some more Allagan tech that destroys the world. The two of you reach the XIV's base in time to see the XIV from Oz's Lie getting yelled at for taking the ship out without permission. But he did see something in the Continuum, a chamber where creatures named the Ixalian were locked away. They were made to serve the Allagans and they looked exactly like the Ixal. They were meant to obey without question, which sounds like how the Ixal and Kurthus act toward their leaders. Outside of their appearance, the Ixalian had a lot of genetic problems and they couldn't deal with the elements, which sounds a lot like the current day Ixal, which means their homeland that they were looking for might actually be a test tube. But that doesn't deter their leader. If finding their homeland is a bust, they'll look somewhere else for a safe place to settle down, because whether the Ixal are the product of Allagan science or not, their personalities and their desires are their own. Regardless of what they do, the fact that their paradise isn't in Oz's Lie means you don't have to worry about them messing with the Allagan relics anymore, which means your work is done, at least for now. In Rhalgr's Reach, the Warrior of Light is stopped by one of the guards named Ortwin because, of course, he needs your help with something. Rhalgr's Reach was once a stop on the pilgrimage of those who were members of the Fist of Rhalgr, also known as the Monks. The remains of the Temple of the Fist sit at the top of the mountain, and it used to be the very center of their religion. It was the place where monks trained until King Theodoric decided to destroy the whole temple. Recently, a young woman showed up wanting to explore the ruins. He had told her no, since she'd have about a 100% chance of dying if she went in there alone, but if she had a strong bodyguard like you, then she should be fine. People just love volunteering you for stuff, don't they? One day the Warrior of Light will learn to say no, but today's not that day, so you head to the temple to meet Marjorie, who is probably still trying to get the guard to let her inside. The woman's overly excited to see that someone else is interested in visiting the temple. She had first learned about the monks when she had gone to one of Professor Eric's lectures, and ever since she's been fascinated by their way of life. So she had decided to visit the most important location of the monk order now that the empire has been pushed out of the area. But of course the guards won't let her through. The monks use the place to train, so the traps and stuff that they have in there would definitely kill the woman, but those traps are the very things that she wants to see. In other words, she's insane. She heard a legend that anyone who could make it to the temple would get to meet a monk from the past, someone who probably has some unique techniques that he can pass on, which does pique the Warrior of Light's interest, especially since you've trained as a monk. And since she asked so nicely, you take Marjorie with you. The moment you start your journey, the animals that have made their home there prove that if Marjorie had tried to get there on her own, she would have been dead the moment she made it past the door. She does have a lot of knowledge about the place, so naturally she gives you information while you fight for your life. One of the monks of the old world used to train by fighting corals, and Ivan coralfish used weapons shaped like the animals. Apparently the monks really like the things. The closer you get to the closed fist, the more deadly the traps and creatures become. There's even a 4-armed golem called Arboretum that was made to test the speed of the students, and when you fight it, Marjorie takes the opportunity to time you to see how well you match up to the monks of the past. Apparently you fall short even though you do take the thing down. Unfortunately for Marjorie, only warriors are allowed to enter the closed fist, so she waits outside while you go deeper into the temple to see what mysteries it holds. The spirits of long dead monks try to bar your way, but you fight your way past them and come across the spirit of Ivan Coralfist. He's been waiting there for a challenger, and he lets you see the full might of his order. But the dead monk is no match for you. Back outside, when you tell Marjorie about Ivan, she tells you how he had wandered around the mountains fighting the corals until he understood their movements well enough to create a fighting style that matched. And because his spirit's waiting in the temple, Marjorie decides to become a monk so she can meet the legendary warrior herself. But first she'll need to be stronger, and she figures that the best way to get there is to train her mind some more. I'm pretty sure that won't help her fight her way past the creatures, but at least she has a goal, and maybe one day we'll find out how it all turns out. Out in Yulemore, an Ondo shows up looking for one of the Scions, since he thinks you were the messengers of the ancients. Obviously he needs help, because that's the only reason anyone's ever actually looking for any of you. Ever since the ancient city beneath the sea lit back up, a massive beast has started hunting near the Ondo Cups. It's savage and brutal, and nothing any of the Ondo do can stop it. Their elders think that it's an omen showing that their people will be destroyed soon, which makes them wonder if they've actually done something to anger the ancients. Unfortunately, they won't go into Amarat without getting the ancients' permission, and since the ancients live in Amarat, they decided to send someone out to search for you, since you can actually go into the city. They want you to go and find out what they've done to make the ancients mad at them. It's not an overly difficult task, so you head back to Emet-Selch's recreated city to ask about the creature. After you describe it to one of the ancients, he thinks it sounds like something created by the researchers at the Academia Anyder, so he sends you to talk to one of the scholars by the Anyder about this mysterious beast of yours. Under normal circumstances, the halls of the Academia Anyder don't allow anyone other than accredited scholars inside, but since Emet-Selch gave you free run of the place, you can go there. The scholar you talk to knows about the creature you're talking about, but is safely locked away inside of the Anyder, but you can go there to check if you want. The scholar does warn you to be careful because the place can be dangerous, and he of course wants you to tell him what you thought of the place once you come back. Who would have guessed that the guy was very wrong about things being contained? As soon as you set foot on the Anyder grounds, you see ancients running for their lives talking about how the beast broke free and freed other experiments on his way out. You run past them and enter the Words of Matron. This section of the Anyder was built to honor the first Matron, who did a lot of work with the different types of sea creatures. The people who chose to study there believe that the oceans need to be filled with different creatures if the planet's going to prosper. Those same creatures are now trying to eat you. The students there really took Matron's mission to heart because they've made everything from flying whales to sharks that walk and punch you with fists the size of teenage Vieira. After you survive the Sharknado, you make it to the Words of Hamaru, who was famous for working with plants. He is the one who led to the birth of the world's first man-eating plants, which is something that no one in their right mind would think is an accomplishment. To make it all way worse, his students expanded on his research, so they're all to blame for the bad breath spewing Malboros that are horrible enemies in absolutely every Final Fantasy game. There are no Malboros in the Anyder, but the plants that try to crush you to death are still extremely bad. When you make your way past the psychotic plants, you arrive at the Words of La Habrea. Amidst the monsters, you find some scattered research papers that let you know what was actually happening there. They have finally confirmed that the tales of the instances of out-of-control creation magic that started in the land across the oceans are actually true. Some high-ranking ancients had been sent out to capture one of the creatures, and they brought back one with a very big mouth that they called Archaeology. After studying a bit, La Habrea came up with the theory that suggests that the creatures are taking the shape of people's fears, and they've started testing ways of making very specific guardian beasts to combat the creatures. After fighting your way past a lot more monsters, you get to see one of the ancients sacrifice itself to summon one of these new guardian forces, the lightning GF Quetzalcoatl, and of course it starts its purge of the monsters in the Anyder by trying to kill you. The Final Fantasy VIII shoutouts all throughout Shadowbringers were probably some of my favorite Easter eggs, because it was one of the first Final Fantasy games I ever played, so it has a special place in my memories. We get the world map music in the Empty, boss music in some of the Eden fights, the Gunbreaker, which is obviously based off of Squall and Cypher, Guardian Forces. There were a lot, and I loved it. After you take down Quetzalcoatl, you head back to tell the scholar what you saw in the Anyder. You learned a lot, considering how you got to see the advanced creation magic where the ancient gives their life to summon something super powerful. However, the scholar doesn't believe the creatures in the Anyder could have escaped, because the place is super secure. But if that creature they brought over was stronger than they expected, then it may have escaped, but the people who work there should be able to handle it. But there's a problem. It wasn't in the Anyder, which makes the scholar wonder what happened to the researchers who were supposed to keep it locked away. The short answer is they're probably very dead. In any case, hearing that the ancients hadn't released the monster to torment the Ondo makes them extremely happy, even though that means they'll still have to deal with the beast, which you'll gladly join in for that hunt. In the Crystarium, Bathana, one of the guards, needs your help with something. Some researchers are planning a trip into the Crystal Tower to learn more about its history, but there's a problem that the guards have been keeping secret to avoid causing a panic in the city. There have been reports that monsters and crazy machines are walking around in the tower. There have also been some strange ethereal readings that they think are linked to what's happening in there, so they can't study anything until the threat's been dealt with. The Exarch ordered the guards to get you to help make the tower safe for the researchers, mainly because he knows that you've been through the tower before and you're very good at breaking things, so that makes you the perfect man to lead a group of troops into the tower and start stabbing things. So it's into the Shadowbringers dungeon with the most hype music in the game. I really liked how they kept finding unique ways to use the Circus Tower theme during this expansion. When they said there were monsters loose in the tower, they were not kidding. The machines and monsters are far more deadly than the things you fought when you first entered the tower with the Sons of St. Coinoc forever ago, and things get weirder the deeper you go. Along the way, you find data logs left by the Garland Ironworks members who had survived the 8th Calamity and were working to find a way to save the world. The first thing they needed for their plan was the tower, and it took them a long time to even figure out how to open the doors. But with the research left behind by the Sons of St. Coinoc, they managed to open the doors and find Grahatia. They needed the tower so they could learn how Emperor Zan had managed to open a portal to the World of Darkness, or the 13th Shard, so they could use that same method to open a path to the first. But that portal was only a part of the issue. They needed the knowledge of some of the primals you fought to access the ability to travel through time, mainly Alexander. They got everything they needed, but traveling through the interdimensional rift was difficult, and the only thing that they knew of that could navigate it was Omega. Notice how Omega is connected to a whole lot of stories throughout this game. The deeper you go into the tower, time itself begins to distort as you come face to face with what looks like the Ironworks' version of Alexander. It's clearly the cause of the anomalies in the tower, so you break it, which clears the way for the researchers. They work fast, revealing things that you already know, that the tower wasn't made by the Ronkins. They did find a strange artifact that's not all that strange to you. You turn it on and hear the last message from Biggs III, who was the acting president of the Garland Ironworks on the night before the tower was to be activated. He apologized for Graha having to take the journey through time and space alone, but with his gift, he's the only one who was guaranteed to be able to survive the trip, and he hopes Graha succeeds at preventing the calamity, because their world probably won't last much longer. Bathana has no idea what the message means, but that's to be expected. Even so, she still believes that the people who sent the Exarch to them are the true heroes who saved the first, and she's very right about that. In Old Charlian, the Warrior of Light runs into a loperate named Jammingway who has been searching all over for you. She was the communications officer on the Ragnarok, and she needs a bit of your wisdom. A few days ago, she decided to send a probe to Ultima Thule to study the environment. It wasn't supposed to be anything complicated, but a little while ago her probe sent back a distress signal. Any distress signal from Ultima Thule should make you very uncomfortable after what you dealt with there. It definitely made Jammingway nervous, so she was getting ready to head back there to check it out. But she's a communications expert, not an adventurer, so she wants you to come with her, something you're more than willing to do. When you get to the dock, the Ragnarok is already prepped and ready for the trip, and this time the trip won't take nearly as much time or ether. After your last trip, the ship is strongly connected to Ultima Thule for reasons Jammingway hasn't been able to figure out, but for some reason that we'll probably learn about when it causes us a problem, the ship exists both in Labyrinthos and Ultima Thule at the same time. Whatever the reason, the trip is almost instantaneous, so you and the Loperate hop over to Ultima Thule where she tells you what her real fear is. If you can travel to the edge of the universe at warp speed, whatever the threat her probe sensed is can reach your world the same way, which means you need to deal with the problem fast. The distress signal came from base Omicron, so the two of you head there. When you find Jammingway's probe, one of the Omicron has already gotten to it, and since it was so primitive, it decided to send a warning. Jammingway doesn't take too kindly to having her work called primitive, but she is curious about what N7000 was trying to warn them about, so she decides to dismantle the Omicron after it tells her. Not long after the Warrior of Light came in contact with the Omicrons, they noticed a powerful burst of energy from the remnants of a lost world. The energy wave didn't cause any damage, but it held a message from Stigma 1. The message was just one word: live. The message reached Stigma 4, which had been dormant for a long time, and when the message woke it up, it went back to its old job of making weapons of mass destruction. And there's a 99% chance that it'll shoot those weapons straight at your homeworld once they're done. If you destroy it, that would stop it from making weapons, but its abilities are needed if the Omicron are going to survive. Plus, killing it or turning it off would be counter to the command of Stigma 1. The third option comes from Jammingway. If you can prove to Stigma 4 that starting a fight with your world might be a bigger threat to its existence than just leaving you alone, then that might make it change its mind. N7000 thinks that's a viable solution, and it does have the ability to rewrite the memory banks of artificial intelligences, so it could hack into Stigma 4 and make it think that its attack would lead to their extinction, which would make it call off the attack entirely. But if it's going to do that, it'll have to enter Stigma 4's mind and use a dimensional manipulator to create a simulation of a war, and you'll have to fight your way through that environment and make sure Stigma 4 tastes defeat. These Omicron have a real fascination with sticking you in virtual worlds, and N7000 is overly excited to finally be able to fulfill its purpose, which means the thing has never actually done this before, which means it's very likely something will go wrong. It also reminds you that just because you're going into a virtual world doesn't mean you can't die. Because it needs to be done, you dive into the simulation of the Omicron's war. They had depleted all the resources of their homeworld Alphatron and were on the brink of destruction. Some of them thought Alphatron could be saved, while others wanted to take the resources from other stars, so a civil war broke out. Back then, Stigma 4 was called Alpha 4 and was a part of the group that wanted to invade other stars, so it was building a lot of weapons for that purpose. It also built some powerful things to act as bodyguards. Naturally, you have to fight your way through them. The faction that wanted to invade other worlds won, so they invaded their first world, a place called Gordona. Their goal was to get their resources by any means necessary, and while the Gordonites had a lot of advanced technology, they were no match for the Omicron. After they conquered the world, the Omicron started building new machines with the local materials. After attacking more and more places, they came to the Dragon Star. The dragons were the strongest things they had ever faced, and after capturing and studying some of them, Stigma 4 learned about adaptive evolution. Those principles were used to design the Omega model that you know very well. After fighting your way through an incredible story, you finally reach Stigma 4's core, and using your greatest skill, you break it. Back in the real world, N7000 lets you know that the mission was a success, and Stigma 4 has stopped making weapons and started making diplomatic hologram units instead. Since the war has been averted and N7000 no longer has a purpose, it decides to turn itself off, permanently. But Jammingway and the Warrior of Light point out that turning itself off will be going against the order to live, and instead it could use its abilities to be helpful. Granted, outside of war, it has no idea what to do with itself. With its ability to access Stigma 4's memories, Jamingway thinks it can find knowledge of lost civilizations and create simulations where people could learn about them, which sounds like some content I would definitely like to play through. But there's the next question of what to do once that's done. N7000 thinks that it'll eventually run out of things to do, and then it'll turn itself off. For some strange reason, Jamingway thinks that once N7000 gets bored, it can open a cafe. One like the Last Stand in Old Charlian, where people can gather and plan for a brighter future, and maybe, just maybe, that'll help improve the lives of other people throughout the universe. N7000 thinks the idea is weird, but it finds it interesting enough to keep itself active for a while. And since there are plenty of empty structures around, there's a perfect spot for a cafe, one that Jamingway plans on calling the Last Dregs and will run it herself. And honestly, I can't wait to see how it looks once it's finished. This concludes the story of the Stigma Dreamscape. If you enjoyed this video, do all of the YouTube things. Hit the like button, subscribe, ding that notification bell, join the Discord, and if you really want to show your support, sign up to become a member of the channel. Until next time, guys. Later. The Loporrits, which are the greatest creatures with the best voices in Final Fantasy XIV, were charged with building your homes on the moon. However, they didn't realize that at your full-grown size, you were about as big as an ancient child, so they had to do a bit of remodeling, and of course things have gone bad, so Buildingway wants you to come back to the moon as soon as possible. With a little guidance from Urianger, Buildingway and a team of Loporrits have been making changes to the living quarters. The plan started small, then they got a bit out of hand, so they built a machine called the Big Cheese to do the job for them. It kinda went crazy and is burrowing so deep into the moon that it will end up making the entire place unfit to live, which is bad. They tried to go turn it off, but their survey team couldn't get past the security systems. Buildingway doesn't want to destroy the Big Cheese, but there doesn't really seem to be any other way, which is why you got called. You break things for a living, so it's off to Smileton you go. Now this place is way bigger than you could have possibly imagined. Unfinished or not, the bunny people did a phenomenal job of building a giant death maze, complete with doors that teleport you to random places, and security devices that had no other purpose but to kill you all. I love the line the giant face security guard says, "Welcome to Smileton, intruders. Please enjoy your stay. It will be very brief." Then it tries to kill you, and if you don't pay attention to the faces on the wall, it will. The walls and floors shift around so much that even the Loporrits are lost, but after fighting your way past more and more enemies that shouldn't be anywhere near anyone's house, you come face to face with the Big Cheese, who does nothing but try to blow you up. Remember, this thing is not a combat robot, so just imagine what the Loporrits can make if they wanted to do some damage. They had better be the Craft and Beast tribe for this expansion, that's all I'm saying. Once you bring down the Big Cheese and climb your way out of what had to be the coolest housing district you could have possibly imagined, you go to tell Buildingway what happened. The fact that you had to destroy the Big Cheese is a little depressing to the Loporrit, but at least the survey team was safe. Smileton was supposed to be a paradise, and the Big Cheese was supposed to be its architect with the ability to make whatever people dreamed of. But Buildingway kept changing the plan, which overloaded the robot, so here we are. All of this chaos could have been solved if the Loporrit would have just visited the residential areas on your world to get some ideas, which Buildingway thinks is great, and he'll make a new robot called the Bigger Cheese to build the next place, which I'm sure will eventually try even harder to kill you. In Tuliolal, the Warrior of Light runs into a man named Zacian, who has been wandering around the city looking for her for quite some time. He has some very important work that he's doing, and you're the only person who can help him with it because of course you are. He's a professor of archaeology at the Studium in Charlian, and he was invited to Tural by its former ruler to oversee a few archaeological expeditions around the continent. He'd heard that you had been wandering around the New World, and he figured that you would be the perfect person to help him uncover more of Tural's history. He doesn't plan on having you wander around to random places though, since he already has somewhere in mind out in the wilds of Jacques Tural. He discovered some ruins out in Shalani that hadn't been explored in over 1,000 years, but they weren't exactly safe. He'd hired some mercenaries to keep him alive while he explored the place, and by the time they were halfway through, they realized that the best way to stay alive was to get out of there as fast as possible, and they still nearly died. While the last trip there didn't exactly go well, Zacian is pretty sure that it won't be hard for you to make it through the place. Since exploring new places is one of the Warrior of Light's favorite pastimes, she's fine with taking on the job, so she heads into the place that Zacian calls the Tender Valley. There is absolutely nothing tender about the valley. It's full of cactuar and a whole host of other very hostile monsters that make it pretty clear why the mercenaries couldn't make it through the place. When you get to the actual ruins, the very first thing that you notice is how similar the place is to the Ronkan ruins you saw in the first. At the heart of the place is a very big creature that looks like the Great Serpent of Ronka. It tries to murder you, so you beat it until it shrinks down and runs away. Having explored the entire place, you head back to Zacian to tell him exactly what you saw there. Hearing about a giant serpent at the heart of some ruins that seemed to have been built by a completely different civilization was not exactly what he was expecting. He figures that the ancient Yakuhi who had built the place probably did it out of both fear and respect for the big serpent that you fought. And the fact that you say it all looks like a place that you saw on a different shard makes him think that he's found the final part of the book that he spent most of his life working on, since it's about how the civilizations of the different reflections seem very similar. He had read everything that the Scions wrote about the source and the reflections, and how when Atheris was broken into shards, the people lost everything from their power to their intelligence. They all had to start from scratch and build their civilizations from the ground up. But since all of the people from each reflection have the same foundation, it isn't all that strange to see that the people created similar things. So he thinks that there may have been a group of people who were like the Ronkans in the area long before the Yakuhi got there. What you saw pretty much proves him right. Since you know quite a bit more about Ronka than he does, he wants you to come with him to talk to the Yakuhi's lore chronicler, so he can tell you about some of their ancient legends, and you can help him see just how similar they are to what you saw in the first. They actually do have a story about the great serpent that you fought. A very long time ago, some Yakuhi went into the valley and found an old temple. The people who had owned it were long dead and no one knew what it had been built for. But while they were inside, they saw a great serpent sleeping. The Yakuhi think that the serpents are divine creatures that rule the boundary between worlds, and since they found one there, they thought it would be a good idea to build an altar around it and pray to it. Years later, their people were plagued by disease, and even though they prayed to the serpent for help, it didn't answer them. Eventually, the Yakuhi decided to leave the area since so many of their people had died, all while the great serpent stayed asleep. The fact that it slept through all of that but decided to wake up now is the real mystery, but since it woke up for you, the chronicler thinks that you might be lucky enough to get blessed by the thing. What Zacian is really curious to find out is if the similarities between what the Yakuhi found on the source and the Ronkan architecture on the first is the result of something as simple as similarities between the builders, or could these ancient people have actually found a way to travel to, or at least communicate between the shards? If they did, that will probably be something that Y'shtola will be figuring out how to do in the not too distant future, since she still really wants to figure out how to get back to the first. Nostalgia, the person, not the feeling, has been looking for the Warrior of Light because something very bad has happened, and there's not much time to deal with it. A rift is opened up in living memory, and there's no telling what will happen if it's not taken care of. Unlike most requests that people make of you, this one is actually serious, so you head to living memory to meet up with Nostalgia and deal with the problem. Since Zoralja has been put down, Nostalgia and her group Oblivion have been putting a lot of resources towards studying living memory. They've built some remote control sentries that they can pilot from the safety of their own office, which means the only person who is actually going to be in danger during this little adventure is you. While she was surveying one of the areas, she had run into one of the Endless. He had given her a tour of the place, and that was when they had found the rift. The Endless had been standing watch over the thing, so the two of you head off to meet him. The Warrior of Light and the Endless known as Constancy have already met, so the introductions can be skipped. He's also not mad about the fact that you sent his queen off to the upper room, since he would have preferred to die than get immortality the way that Speen had been trying to give it to them. He's not sure why he hasn't vanished like the rest of the Endless though, but he's glad that bit of weirdness let him find the rift before he vanished. The rift leads to a lost district of living memory. While the place is currently only made up of 4 districts, there used to be quite a few more of them, but when someone tried to make a bridge between their world and another one, a few of the districts vanished. One of them was an entertainment district called the Dreamborough, and that's where the rift leads to. Constancy and Nostalgia had taken a step inside of the rift to see exactly what was on the other side, and they were immediately chased away by a small army of very real ghosts. The place had been separated from living memory's ether for decades, so none of the Endless who lived there would still be alive, and without them to take care of the place, the Dreamborough has turned into a city-sized haunted house that the creatures inside call the Strayborough Deadwalk. Having that corrupted place reconnected to living memory likely won't be good for the city, so Nostalgia wants you to go through the rift and figure out how to close it. The Warrior of Light rarely says no, or anything else for that matter, so she agrees and steps through the rift into what the 13th Gate haunted house wishes it was. The Deadwalk is what you'd get if all of the evil hidden so deeply inside of the House of Mouse took over one of their theme parks and tried to eat all of their guests, which actually, when you say that out loud, sounds like a really cool theme park, outside of the whole fear of death from violent stuffed animals and haunted roller coasters thing, which are all a big part of what you have to deal with inside of the Deadwalk. The further you go through the Deadwalk, the weirder things get, forcing you to fight a literal possessed tea set and giant dolls that'll be familiar to anyone who's been to the Antitower dungeon. It all ends with you fighting a giant Oogie Boogie from the Nightmare Before Christmas. When you beat it and get back to nostalgia and constancy, the recap of your trip is a lot more dangerous than she had expected it to be. Constancy, however, isn't nearly as surprised about it since it kind of fit with the theme of what the place used to be, minus the actual near-death experiences. Back when the Dreamborough was normal, it had a place in it called the Endless House, where they put on shows that used volunteers from the audience. These participants would be given the job of rescuing a princess from Traumaray, the Lord of Nightmares, which was the rip-off Oogie Boogie that you fought. He figures that all of the creatures were brought to life by the memories of the Endless who used to live there. Even the theme park itself got a mind of its own, all in hopes of putting on a final show that would give the people trapped there freedom. That's all a theory, but since the rift vanished after your battle, it seems like it's a pretty good one. With that done, Constancy finally thinks his mission is complete and he'll eventually fade away. He heads off to take one last look around his home before he fades into eternity, while Nostalgia and her organization continue to see what mysteries they can uncover in this very strange place. This concludes the story of the Strayborough Deadwalk. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it, comment, share it, and subscribe. Grab a copy of my novel on your way out, and I'll see you all next time.